Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Owning Your Role as an Intern. This is Cole Hoover. A lot of you have probably gotten a chance to talk with me. I'd be surprised if there's some of you who haven't. I've definitely gotten the chance to talk to a ton of you on the phone, and know that I'm, again, always here if you have any questions about the internship. Also with me on the call, we have Alan Gula calling in from Panama. And today we're going to be talking a lot more about kind of the philosophy behind the internships and your role in them, and less about logistics. Please feel free to reach out offline if you have any other questions. I'm always around, as is Alan. But today we really want to talk a little bit more about what you're going to be learning before you go on the internship, how you're going to be preparing yourself, and how you make this month a really amazing, dynamic experience. And so I've got a little presentation for you all, and I'll share my screen in a minute. But first off, I just wanted to take a second to give the opportunity to reflect on the video that we all sent out, the Beth Huggins video. And just for a refresher, Beth went and did a medical brigade in Ghana. But then she, very, very quickly realized that there was a lot of other things going on. And she started, asking questions of herself, why am I here? Um, what are the reasons that I'm doing this? And I just wanted to open up the floor to anyone who had any comments. If you'd like to just, you can type them, you can raise your hand. Just would love to hear from anyone on some reactions from the Beth Huggins video and how that made you feel. And also, if there's no comments right now, we can always save that. I think we're going to have a little bit of a discussion at the end. So last call on any comments right now. Alrighty. Well, then we're just going to jump right in. Some of the things that we took away from Beth's presentation that we thought was just absolutely amazing and inspiring was the fact that she went there as a medical brigader with all of the attachments. I am a pre-med student. I would like to someday be a doctor, potentially a public health professional abroad, but I am going with this narrow focus of being a medical professional or a pre-medical professional. But then when she got there, she realized that not only was her role as a brigader not so linear and focused, I mean, it involved a lot of other things. She realized quickly that she was there to learn from others. She was there to build relationships, even if those relationships were only to understand the people better. Um, and she also, when it came down to it, realized that she was there to be useful. And the revelation that she had through having conversations with our staff members and many with our communities was that although this was a medical brigade, there are many other things that play into the health and wellness of a community from a medical perspective. Their finances are one, their water is one. And so she started realizing that although she was asking a lot of questions that would traditionally seem to be outside of her very rigid, or at least up till that point, rigid medical focus, questions in the area of business, that these weren't just a diversion. So these weren't, new areas she was going into. These were just supporting factors of the health of the community. When she asked the questions about how do you earn your money, how do you save your money, how often do you have money around, she was asking that to learn, how do you effectively save for when your family has a medical emergency? How do you set yourself up for success to make sure that sickness can be dealt with in a swift manner? And how do you stay healthy? And so we were just very inspired that Beth not only started to learn, started to build relationships, and really meditate on how am I going to be useful to these people, but also that she started to tap into what Brigades is all about, and that's the holistic model. And actually, I have one hand up, and so we'd love to hear from you. Diane, I'm going to turn your mic on. Did you have a question or a comment you'd like to make about the Beth Huggins video? Hi, Diane? Or is it Dinah? Okay, maybe not. We'll save it for later. Alrighty, well then I am going to jump into the presentation. be sharing the screen in a minute. Please raise your hand or ask any questions. We're not going to take any during the presentation. We'll have them all for the end. So the only people who will be presenting for a moment will be Alan and I. Alrighty. So again, the subject of this webinar is owning your role as an intern. We don't want you only to go there and, think of this as your regular volunteer experience. This is something that is far beyond that. This is even far beyond a brigade, what many of you have gotten the chance to do. This is a whole new animal, a new experience. It's not just four brigades stacked on each other. It is a whole new way to look at the way that Global Brigades does sustainable development and global health and what your role is in it. And so, for those of you who don't have much experience with Global Brigades, first I'll just dive into what our vision and mission are as an organization. And so, our vision is in response to global disparity in the quality of life, we will ignite the largest student led social responsibility movement on the planet. And this is something that over the past 10 years we've been able to accomplish with the help of students like you. Without our students, without our brigaders, and now our interns, what we do would not be possible. And so, on the other side, our mission, our real reason to be is how do we empower volunteers to facilitate sustainable solutions in under-resourced communities while still fostering local cultures? And this is a huge piece. We're here to empower you, but we're also here to kind of train the trainer. We want to empower you to empower others. We give you the opportunity to go into communities, to learn from them, to make suggestions, to offer your skills, but also to do that in an extremely respectful way, to be useful, and find any way possible for you to plug into our holistic model. There's a lot of different volunteer organizations, and there's a lot of even bigger NGOs that don't really even do that so well. They have an idea that's sometimes developed in an office far, far away in Washington, D.C., and it's brought to a local community. And without really asking anyone, they just go in and start doing things. And that's just not what our organization is about. And specifically, the driving principle of the internships and the parent organization within Global Brigades, which is the Global Brigades Institutes, is that we want to increase a generation's awareness and ability to participate in sustainable, holistic, and human-centered development. And so what that means is starting to rethink what, aid, international development, social entrepreneurship, global health, what all these things mean. Because as our world's getting smaller and smaller, as technology is getting better, and as the problems of poverty persist, we need to find ways to address these problems in new ways. There's been a lot of amazing things that our parents' generation has been able to do, but we want to make sure that we are training a generation of people who are not only going and offering solutions and offering analysis to how problems are solved, but we want people who are actually going and asking questions and collaborating with people on the ground. We think that a collaborative model is the only way that the problems of our world are ever going to be solved, because empowering local people is the only long-term sustainable way to actually solve the problems of poverty. And so just for an example of this, a lot of our work, and specifically a lot of our philosophy around the internship, comes from this idea that the people who are coming into the big public health jobs, working for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working for USAID, working for the World Bank, sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of these people may have had an amazing academic experience. They've had the classroom time, they've learned theoretically what happens on the ground, but they many times have never spent a meaningful amount of time in a rural community or a country affected by poverty, and therefore the solutions that they're bringing just aren't as connected to reality as we need them to be. I was speaking with a mentor years ago who worked for a large organization that had gotten the opportunity to work in West Africa. And they wanted to improve the access to clean water in loads of these communities in a mainly Muslim region of this country. And so they saw this very antiquated process. They saw all these women gathering around wells, and then they saw them putting the buckets of water on their head, walking home, miles in some cases. And they said, we can improve this. If we could, have a single water supply or a couple in the community, and we could take pipes, we could get the water into their households, we could make it cleaner, we could cut down the walking, and we could make these people more efficient. We could make their lives easier. So they got a grant for several $100,000. I mean, this was a lot of money, and they built all the piping. They set up the water tanks, but they did this without getting a lot of local feedback. Many times they would ask questions without really asking a question. There's a lot of communities where if you come in and you offer something, they'll accept it. But if you don't really dig in, they won't tell you the reasons that it won't work because they're just good hosts. And they've seen this happen time and time again. And so, what happened in this specific case, the consequence of not listening and not asking questions was they came back in a year and they saw that there was still tons of people making the long walk, making the hard walk over to the well. The wells were still crowded, and a lot of the piping just wasn't getting used in the ways that they wanted. And the reason for this was that this was a community where they were devoutly Muslim. The women spent, a lot of time in their house. It was just a cultural expectation. But the one place that they could go and socialize, the one place that really brought them joy, where they built community, where they came together and helped each other solve problems, was the well. And so, although these fancy pipes had been built, and although all this money had been spent to create a clean water system, it wasn't utilized because the well was such a significant cultural place. And had they known that, they would have taken an entirely different route to design. And so, just to give this as a cautionary tale, I want you all to know that we're trying to prepare you to be the kind of people who go in and ask the kind of questions and build the kind of relationships you need to actually make informed decisions on what kind of sustainable development projects we need to be working on. And this is the foundation that Global Brigades has been building from the beginning. And so, where we work, many of you probably are already aware, but we have 4 different countries that we work in: Ghana, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. Many of you on the call are going to be going to one of these countries. And where we work are extremely rural areas. They're disconnected. They have a lot of different issues that they need help solving, but they also have amazing assets. They have strong communities, which we've made partnerships with. There are places that are welcoming and safe to volunteers. And because of this, when you really go in and listen, you have an amazing opportunity to address some real basic needs in healthcare, local economics, environmental issues, human rights issues, basic infrastructure that could help lift them out of poverty. But the only way that that's going to happen is if you train yourself to ask the right questions, listen when appropriately, and only act when you've had a little bit of time to actually analyze the situation. So to prepare you, the very, very first step is we wanted to just pass out some of the principles that we think effective international volunteers have. And so, again, this is recorded. You'll all get a chance to watch this again, and I'll send out the PowerPoint presentation so you can go back and take a look. But here are 6 principles that I'll go through that are based off of some amazing volunteer work done by some of the people at Transitions Abroad. And so the first one is flexibility. And this can be a really, really tricky thing to master. But again, you have to have realistic expectations about what's going to happen when you go on your internship. But at the same time, you have to be prepared for the unexpected. Being a good volunteer is about doing what is necessary. You are there to serve. You are not there for a vacation. These are people who are, struggling to get by, and they are taking time out of their schedule where they could be working, and they are spending time with you because you are both sharing a vision for what their community could be. They are having a lot of faith in you. And so it just behooves you to realize that they are making a sacrifice to be working on these projects. And therefore, you need to be there just prepared to work, prepared to be useful, and prepared to give feedback where necessary. But more than anything, working in a lot of these rural communities in these different countries, you have to be flexible. Just go there and know that the Global Brigade staff, they work with these communities year round, and they're able to, expertly ask questions and get to the core of an issue, and they will help you determine how you can be the most useful. But again, just like Beth in the video, she went with these preconceived notions that she was a pre-med student and would be working, solely on medical projects. And for the most part, you will be staying somewhat within your area of focus, but also be open to some of that amazing flexibility because it'll give you a chance to learn more. And next, I think maybe one of the hugest ones is patience. Um, Everything moves. For those of you who haven't spent much time in the global south or in under-resourced countries, everything moves at a different pace. Meetings are much more fluid. Time doesn't really have the same kind of meaning that it does for us in our lives. And therefore, that can mean that people are late for things. It can mean that projects can go much longer than you would have anticipated. And you just have to know that people aren't doing this out of disrespect to you. They're not doing this out of laziness. Those would be conclusions that you would jump to based on your own perspectives of time. They're just doing this because this is how they operate. They have an entirely different conception of time. But then on the other side, they have a really interesting idea of time in the sense that investing time in people and investing time in relationships and in your community, it's a slow process, but it is one of the most important things you can do to actually create a solid community. And whereas, we might be on time to meetings in our daily life, maybe we don't spend the same kind of time, maybe we don't invest the time in relationships around us. And, some would argue that the relationships can be stronger in a lot of the communities that you'll encounter. And that's one way that, their patience really pays off. So the big recommendation that we would have is just maximize your effectiveness and maintain a positive attitude. And that instead of focusing on the successes of a project, focusing on the outcomes, just focus on the process. Let it evolve in the way that it should evolve. You're obviously not going to save the world in a month, but you are going to make an amazing contribution just by being there and being part of this amazing chain of sustainable development. So just try to orient your attitude like that. The next principle is openness. And so, openness again is about not jumping to conclusions. And also realizing that, again, if someone's late for a meeting, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's disrespecting you. That would be a conclusion. It doesn't mean that they are lazy. And also, something that I always find makes this easy, makes this openness really a possibility, is when you realize that you're not the only one experiencing culture shock. There may be many things that when you go into this community, you're doing that, seem like a faux pas or seem like something that wouldn't be done or maybe shock or surprise the community members. But they're going to be open to you because, they've been working with Global Brigade so long and they've seen so many people from different cultures come and work with them. And so they have this amazing level of openness where they are inviting you into their community and into their working process, and they're being open to how you do it. So the only thing that we would request is that you have the same kind of open-mindedness, because you are from very different cultures with extremely different experiences. And don't be afraid to acknowledge that. I mean, don't be afraid to acknowledge the judgments or the prejudices that you have, because if you think that you don't have any, then you probably are lying to yourself. The one thing that you can do, though, is you can recognize those prejudices and just don't allow yourself to color the situation by them. Acknowledge them, let them pass, or even spend time, thinking about why you have that. But don't act on them, and don't let it color your experience. So the next principle is dependability. So, like I was saying before, these people have very precarious financial existences. They are always looking for, daily labor. Maybe they run a business where they have to be open at all hours of the day to make the kind of profit they need to support their family. any time that they are spending with you or on these projects, although in the long term it will be amazingly beneficial to them, they are making a sacrifice and they are putting faith in you. The privilege of volunteering abroad comes with a great responsibility. And the big reason for that is that first off, you don't want to waste these people's time. They're having a lot of faith in you. But also, with other organizations, and this is something that Brigades prides itself on, immensely, with other organizations, you can many times get people just coming through. Maybe it's building a house, maybe it's, setting up something really quick and then just moving on. Maybe the locals haven't been taught how to maintain the system. Maybe the system isn't even finished when you're leaving. And so people in the global south have learned how to have a healthy level of caution because I think so many times they've been let down by well-intentioned Westerners coming in, wanting to save the world, but not thinking about a long-term strategy. And so to really prove your dependability, be there and do everything you can to be a part of something that's going to finish a project in their community. And that's why these internships and these brigades are set up on a continuous basis, and why we don't, set you up with the idea that you're going to have this great success and you're necessarily going to finish something. You are part of an amazing chain, amazing sustainable chain of interns and brigaders who go over there and finish projects because we depend on the community's trust and their faith in us that we are going to be a transformative part of their community in the long term. So the basis of this is just work hard and realize that you're part of something much bigger. And so another thing is that, although there's all this caution and there's all these things that you should be aware of, it shouldn't take away from the fact that this is just fun. You're discovering a new culture. You're using the things that in your classes in school you learned to be able to do something practical. You're being able to use the skills that you've accumulated throughout your whole life to change people's lives. And that is absolutely amazing. And you should not for one moment underestimate what can be achieved, when you have the right attitude, you have energy, enthusiasm, open-mindedness, and an ability to learn from others. Be enthusiastic because, again, you're not going to save the world in 1 month, but your enthusiasm is contagious. And you will absolutely color what it is like in that community, in the next brigade, and throughout the next year. So bring a great attitude because this is fun. You're on an adventure. You're doing something completely out of your comfort zone, but you're also doing it to help people. And I'd say that goes to one of the last principles, and that is humility. And throughout this whole process, going to a different country, going to a place where they speak a different language than you, have different customs, maybe it's different ordering at a restaurant or getting on transportation. A lot of times you are going to depend on the kindness and the faith of the people around you. You're going to depend on our local employees who are, members of that community, members of that country to get you around. But what all this should be giving you is not anxiety, but this level of humility in recognizing that you're not coming in as the expert. You're coming in with a fresh set of eyes, not only to get around, but to learn about what these communities need and how you can plug in. And the couple questions I'd love you to ask yourself, first off, is what knowledge and skills do the people from this community possess that I do not? A lot of times in international development, we find that it is a process where you're assuming that the people coming from the West are the ones who are the experts, they have all the answers, but many times that's incorrect because they miss out on the cultural context, on the local issues, and also the local assets. So ask yourself, what do these people know that I do not? And how can I bring to the equation things that they do not know to enhance the whole situation? What life experiences do they have that are extremely different from mine? What challenges have they faced that have gotten them to this point that are going to factor into how they react to a Global Brigades project, how they commit to a different initiative? What are some of their personal and professional strengths? We always go into a community and we do not, from the beginning, do a needs assessment alone. We also do an assets assessment. We figure out what are the abilities and what is the infrastructure in these communities that we can use to actually empower them to make a change. And so please just spend some time thinking from a very humble perspective, knowing that you are not the expert, You are here to learn, build relationships, and be useful. And from this, you're going to get an amazingly enlightened perspective on what doing international development can really be about. And you're going to be joining a much more thoughtful generation of international development practitioners. Because as most trends are going, this is how it is going to be. This kind of removed command and control brand of international development is going the way of the buffalo. And so we're trying to make sure that you all are all prepared for a new world that is more about collaboration. And so the one last thing that I would like to chat a little bit about, and Alan, if you'd like to jump on and talk a little bit about our holistic model and then go into some different volunteer examples, that'd be fantastic. Alan, are you there?
Cole, can you hear me okay?
Can hear you perfect, Alan.
Right on. Well, first of all, I think you've done a phenomenal presentation up until this slide. This has been really effective and helpful, and I do want to reiterate some of the things that Cole had said. The first one being, please, please, please hit the raise the hand button or type a question into the question bar, because these webinars are much less of a presentation and much more of, I guess, a brainstorm and an opportunity to discuss aspects of preparing for the internship. So please, this wasn't meant to be in any way, shape, or form a presentation by Cole and I that dominates an agenda, but rather an open forum for everybody that's going to all countries to discuss principles of being an effective volunteer. So use the question bar, raise the hand, and if you don't feel comfortable doing it in front of everybody else, then contact us offline. Because I think that a lot of these points are phenomenal and need to be kept in mind, and we're concentrating on it more than ever this year. And I did want to go back to the opening part of the presentation where Cole had asked about comments for the Beth Huggins TEDx video. And I think that the overwhelming thing, despite the presentation and the content, was that Beth was a medical brigades volunteer from the University of Oklahoma in January of 2012, and then became a Ghana, like Cole had mentioned, a global health volunteer by June 2012. And then in that span, she had prepared, again, the first ever internship that this organization has ever had. She had been able to formulate her experience in such a way and do such a good job. And I've watched a lot of TEDx talks and I've seen a lot of presentations. And so for a very mild-mannered, soft-spoken student to stand up on a stage at her university campus and to present about her internship on the first year that we had ever had these internships, I was really blown away. And I think that, again, apart from the content and the message of what she's saying, which we could have an entire webinar dedicated to, kind of the content of what Beth took away from the internship, the thing that surprised me the most is that was a possibility. That was a possibility of an intern, and I do want you to keep that in mind. Not saying that everybody needs to book a TEDx, but that the experience of the internship gives rise to how you, I guess, analyze your role as a volunteer many months after. And so Beth was not the only one that continued with their project. Beth was the one that has the most concrete example in a YouTube video to direct people to her TED Talk. But many other interns that worked in 2012 have continued to do fundraising into 2013 and have continued to cite that the internship was a formative part of their understanding of exactly what this slide is, understanding the model. And so that's my transition for kind of getting into what Cole is discovering and talking about for how we can, make this internship more than a 4-week succession of brigading. This is a totally different product. This is a totally different experience. And so I think that the best way to comprehend what the internship is going to be is to remember back to what it needs to be. And that needs to be a project or an experience that is beneficial for you as a participant, the community members, again, as our Global Brigades family and main beneficiaries, and then the organization, be it Global Brigades as an overarching movement, or specifically to the country where you work. Again, I think those are the 3-pronged deliverables that each one of us needs to keep in mind. Our staff need to make sure that that is facilitated. Our community members need to be reminded that that's the purpose of the internship. And then overwhelmingly, you as a participant need to keep that as your mantra or guiding principle of focus for decision making and reminding yourselves throughout the month as you have a whole influx of ideas, as you're reading new publications and papers, as you're doing interviews in the community and also to Gold Brigade staff members. It's easy to get overwhelmed with information. And when we're overwhelmed with information, we feel as if at times it's difficult to make sense of an experience. And so the only thing I try and fall back on is maybe the reason that I was there in the first place. And for me, it helps to think of, okay, my deliverables are always to this university student movement. This needs to be personally sustainable, as in I need to feel comfortable with the work that I'm doing. I need to feel fulfilled, and I need to feel that I'm giving something to my own personal growth. And ultimately, because I wear Global Brigades t-shirts, that's the nonprofit that I'm working for, or that's the organization that will be able to have the staff members that carry on long after I leave a country, especially if I'm an intern, or especially if my opportunity is for a 1 week brigade or a 1 month internship, or again, I'm going on 4 years of employment with Global Brigades. I always consider sustainability as our ability to pass the baton, be it philosophical or a literal project, onto the staff and for those that are going to commit this to being a life work. So I want that message to kind of override any sentiment that, a month isn't enough, or, a month is something that I wish I could give more or spend more time. I don't think any length of time is ever enough. If this is truly a lifestyle, then again, the title of this slide, you've understood the model. Sustainability is in your ability to make sense of this and to pass it on. And so what we're talking about, if we break it down in the nuts and bolts of what we call holistic development, is partly history, meaning that Global Brigades began as a medical brigade. We evolved to offering water projects, public health projects, business and microfinance projects, and the model became holistic because it provided services, not only to community members on different fronts, but it also addressed the fact that poverty is very rarely a single variable. It comes from different ways. And when they're overarching, it becomes very difficult to say that medical brigades is curing all the woes of a particular community. What needs to be remembered is that financial illiteracy contributes to poverty. Maybe having access to dirty water contributes to personal health, and therefore contributes to an issue that is addressed by water brigades. Open defecation, that's pooping without having a concentrated area or designated spot, is a public health concern. That overlaps into medical brigades. Architecture brigades, and what we're getting into is looking at how the environment affects your health. And so that is a short version of the model. The model is holistic because so too are the problems that people face in rural communities. And so when you get into the internship, that's a little bit why it's scheduled the way that it is. We are going to not be able to call it global health or sustainable development without highlighting the programs and projects that make it holistic in each one of our countries. And so if you look at the itinerary, a different week will be spent with each program and project in each country. And that opportunity will give the participant an idea of this model and what it's like to address rural community development projects from many different angles. And so, Cole, on this slide, I think the reason you have medical brigades is because you wanted to know successful medical global health type internship projects.
Yeah, I was just hoping, Alan, either through medical brigades or any specific brigade that we do, if you could just give some examples of, students who learned how to ask questions effectively, learned how to integrate themselves into the community, and, what kind of difference that made.
Perfect. The itinerary provides for this learning curve. If you've never been in a rural community or you've never done door-to-door, I would consider research and evaluation type of projects. The orientation week is going to be that opportunity to learn how to do this. I think that students that communicate well with community members don't necessarily need to speak the national language. And so I do want to kind of throw that down as something to consider. If you're in Latin America and you speak Spanish, you increase your ability to know the words and make sentences to ask questions. But that is very, very different than communication. Communication can transcend with body language and any other type of using an interpreter. So I definitely want to make sure that communication is an open definition and that you don't get fearful and thinking that because you don't have a background in Fante or Tree for Ghana or Spanish for Latin American internships, that you automatically cancel yourself out and say, there's no way I'm going to be able to approach a community member and ask them what I really want to know for my internship. That's why Global Brigades provides interpreters, and we're going to have staff members that work alongside you for the month that you're there to facilitate that interaction. If I didn't speak the language of the community member that I wanted to interview, then I needed to work twice as hard with the Global Brigade staff member that was my interpreter to prep them and get them to understand what I'm about to ask the community member. And that required a little bit of foresight on my part, and it required me to clarify exactly what I wanted to get out of this interaction. And then overwhelmingly, if the person doesn't understand what I'm saying because of a language barrier, then I had better be very astute and very aware of my body language and my eye contact, because everybody can read that. And so that, for me, is a very key part of communication. Communication does not need to always speak the same language. How do we know this? Because those of us that speak the same language still get into fights over rhetoric and communication. If you've ever been in a relationship with somebody, you know what I'm talking about. When you say things in a certain way and voice inflection doesn't necessarily mean that you two are going to communicate. Communication is holistic as well. You need to watch what you say. You need to make sure you say it appropriately. You need to watch your body language. And I think that is a very, very possible aspect. But that orientation in that first week in country is meant to address kind of how we as a nonprofit have made the door-to-door days in Ghana and some of the other community interactions. Just going off this past weekend, we had a Deloitte professional brigade, and Deloitte again is one of the largest accounting and also business consulting firms in the entire world, and they work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And so last week I brought them into Eastern Panama and sat them down with local nonprofits and community members, and that was a completely different clientele. That was a clientele that for Deloitte is very different than talking to a Fortune 500 company. And I think that they even had to modify and they even need to be oriented on how exactly to work with rural community members. So again, this doesn't mean that if you have years of experience, I think each interaction is unique and defining in your ability to work with that person to understand exactly what you wanted to get out of that interaction. That is communication. And being successful at that is, again, doing the things that I had mentioned. Eye contact, prepping an interpreter, having clarity about what you want to ask the person, and humility in that interaction to not just jump in there and pretend like you're a census collector. Data extraction is a lot easier done on the internet, but a conversation is not just a robotic data extraction. It is an opportunity for you to introduce yourself. It is an opportunity for you to present yourself, to present why you're here, to share a little bit about who you are, and ask questions about who the target audience is, and say that thank you very much. This is an opportunity for me to learn. I'm appreciative of your time, and I'm very interested in getting to have an opportunity to speak with you again throughout this month. And always say thank you and always introduce yourself. No matter if we're working in Latin America or West Africa, these are crucial parts of community member engagements that I think that can oftentimes be forgotten in the maybe busy world of a college campus or even within an office. Make sure that you pay particular attention to introducing yourself and saying goodbye to somebody, and I think that that'll go a long way.
Awesome, Alan. Thank you so much. So we're going to end the presentation right now and just open it up to questions and comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can get all of your comments.